The camera begins rolling in a small interrogation room. A teenage girl sits slouched in her chair, her expression somewhere between annoyance and boredom. To the officers watching her, it's a strange sight. Most people who find themselves in this position are scared, nervous, or at least pretending to cooperate. But this girl, Aria Armstead, looks like she's at a routine appointment she'd rather not be at. Her long hair falls across her face as she scrolls through her thoughts, chewing gum casually. She glances at the detectives, then back at the table, her fingers tapping like she's impatient for them to get to the point. It's not the posture of an accused murderer, but appearances can deceive. The officers begin to question her. They ask about her night, about her friends, about the events that unfolded just hours earlier. Aria shrugs, dodges, smiles faintly. Her voice is laced with a mix of defiance and disinterest, as though she's rehearsed this part before. She doesn't seem to grasp the gravity of where she is or what she's done. Or maybe she does, and she just doesn't care. Because by this point, police already know what happened. They already know that Matthew Collins, a 19-year-old college student, is dead. They already know that Aria and her boyfriend Nathan Ortiz lured him into a trap on that quiet Florida night. And they already know that what began as a twisted plan fueled by jealousy and narcissism ended in cold-blooded murder. What they want now is for Aria to admit it, to show even a shred of humanity. But humanity isn't what comes through. Instead, she smirks when she thinks they aren't looking. She toys with her hair, as if she's trying to charm her way out of a speeding ticket. She even laughs softly, as though the whole thing is some kind of inconvenience. For detectives, it's chilling. They've seen killers break down in tears, collapse under guilt, and scream in rage. But rarely have they seen someone so young, so composed, and so disturbingly detached. As questioning continues, details begin to emerge. Aria tries to paint herself as innocent, as though she had no idea what Nathan planned to do. She claims she was just along for the ride, that Matthew's death wasn't her fault. But the evidence tells a different story. Witnesses saw her with Nathan in the hours before the crime. Text messages recovered from her phone showed her mocking Matthew, playing games with his feelings, and egging Nathan on. And most damning of all, her fingerprints were found on the weapon. The truth was undeniable. Aria and Nathan had lured Matthew out under the guise of hanging out. He trusted them. He had no reason to think he was walking into danger. But once they had him isolated, the plan unfolded with ruthless precision. Nathan attacked him while Aria stood by, her phone recording parts of the chaos, her voice audible in the background. Not once did she scream for it to stop. Not once did she try to save him. Matthew Collins' life ended that night in the most brutal way imaginable. And as his family sat shattered, grieving the son they loved, Aria sat in an interrogation room, annoyed, restless, almost entertained. It was behavior that prosecutors would later use to devastating effect in court. Because this wasn't just about murder. This was about the psychology of a teenage girl who seemed incapable of empathy, who placed her own desires above another person's life, who smirked as she walked into a future she thought she could manipulate her way out of. When the footage of her interrogation eventually surfaced, it shocked the public. Viewers couldn't look away from the way she carried herself. It wasn't just her youth that unsettled people. It was her indifference, the sense that she wasn't sorry, not for what she did, not for the life that was taken, and not for the pain inflicted on an innocent family. Before we go deeper into this story, take a moment to subscribe. These true crime stories remind us that evil doesn't always wear the face we expect. Sometimes it looks like a teenage girl who thinks she can smile her way past justice. By subscribing, you make sure stories like Matthew's are never forgotten. Detectives pressed on with Aria, but she remained evasive. She giggled when they asked serious questions. She toyed with her sleeve when they confronted her with evidence. At times, she leaned back in her chair, looking almost proud, as though she had outsmarted them. But the cracks soon appeared. When officers mentioned Nathan by name, her composure faltered. For a split second, the mask slipped. She straightened, her tone sharpened, and she grew defensive. It became clear that Nathan was the center of her world, the one she was protecting, the one she thought would shield her from responsibility. But in reality, Nathan was already talking. In a separate room, detectives had pressed him with the same questions. Unlike Aria, Nathan wasn't as skilled at hiding nerves. He sweated, fidgeted, stumbled over his story. And when they presented him with evidence, texts, calls, surveillance, his version collapsed. Soon, the betrayal began. Nathan pointed to Aria, claiming she pushed him, that she encouraged the plan, that she wanted Matthew out of the way. He painted her not as an innocent bystander, but as the instigator. And suddenly, Aria's laughter didn't look so clever anymore. Aria Armstead grew up in Florida, surrounded by the distractions of teenage life. Friends, parties, the digital world of social media. To most who knew her, she was ordinary enough. She took pictures like any other teen, posted updates, and crafted an online persona that made her seem charming and confident. But beneath that surface was something darker, something that would eventually reveal itself in the most horrifying way. She met Nathan Ortiz, an older boy with his own troubles, and the two quickly became inseparable. Their relationship was intense, toxic, and consuming. Friends noticed how Aria's personality shifted when Nathan was around. She became more secretive, more manipulative, and seemed to thrive on the drama their relationship generated. To Aria, Nathan wasn't just a boyfriend. He was validation, attention, someone who fueled her craving for control. And then came Matthew Collins. Matthew wasn't a dangerous person. He wasn't the kind of guy who made enemies. At just 19, he was still figuring out who he was, working part-time jobs, taking classes, hanging out with friends. By all accounts, he was gentle and trusting, the kind of young man who saw the good in people. Unfortunately, that made him easy to manipulate, and Aria saw it. Through messages and meetups, Aria drew Matthew in. She flirted just enough to keep his attention, played coy when he asked questions, and dangled the possibility of something more. But it wasn't romance she wanted. It was power. She mocked him in private conversations with Nathan, laughing about how easy it was to string him along. The text later recovered would show Aria boasting about how Matthew was desperate and pathetic. This manipulation built to the night of the crime. Aria told Matthew to meet up, making it sound casual, harmless. She didn't mention Nathan would be there too. To Matthew, it was just another chance to spend time with a girl he thought liked him. He had no idea he was walking into a trap. The meeting spot was quiet, secluded. Streetlights flickered in the distance, but the shadows stretched long. Matthew arrived, probably nervous but hopeful. He greeted Aria, unaware of the danger just steps away, because Nathan was waiting, already prepared for what was about to happen. The confrontation was quick and brutal. Nathan attacked first, a sudden explosion of violence. Matthew tried to defend himself, but he was caught off guard, outnumbered. Aria stood by, not as a helpless witness, but as someone who had known this moment was coming. She laughed in the background, her voice captured on her phone as she recorded snippets of the chaos. She never screamed for help. She never told Nathan to stop. She only added to the cruelty by treating the moment like entertainment. Matthew's final moments were filled with confusion and pain. He had trusted her. He had thought he was meeting a girl who wanted to see him. Instead, he was betrayed by someone who saw his life as disposable. When it was over, Aria and Nathan left him behind. To them, it was just another night, a dark secret they thought they could bury. But secrets have a way of surfacing. It didn't take long for police to connect the dots. Messages on Matthew's phone led them directly to Aria. Surveillance footage showed her and Nathan together before and after the murder. Witnesses reported seeing them with Matthew on the night he disappeared. And when investigators dug deeper into her phone, the evidence was damning. Cruel texts mocking Matthew, voice recordings, and even her fingerprints on the weapon. Still, Aria behaved as though she could talk her way out of it. In the interrogation room, she smirked, flipped her hair, rolled her eyes. She denied and deflected, painting herself as a clueless bystander. She insisted that Nathan had acted alone, that she was just caught in the middle. But the evidence screamed otherwise, and prosecutors were ready to show the jury the real Aria Armstead, not the giggling teenager in the interrogation videos, but a cold manipulator who played with a young man's life and threw it away. When the trial began, the footage of her interrogation was played for the court. The jury watched her laugh, smile, and joke as detectives asked about Matthew's murder. They saw her indifference, her lack of empathy, her chilling calm. It was an image that stuck with them, one that prosecutors hammered on repeatedly. The texts between her and Nathan were read aloud. The words painted her as cruel, mocking, narcissistic. She had called Matthew names, belittled him, and bragged about manipulating him. Jurors listened to every word, their faces tightening as they realized this wasn't a girl caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was someone who thrived on the suffering of others. Matthew's family sat in the courtroom, forced to relive their son's final moments. They listened as strangers dissected his life and death, as recordings echoed with Aria's laughter. For them, the hardest part wasn't just the violence. It was knowing that Matthew had been betrayed by someone he trusted, that his kindness had been exploited. And yet, Aria seemed unbothered. She sat with her head high, whispering occasionally to her attorney, her demeanor cold and composed. For a girl facing the possibility of life in prison, she seemed almost proud, as though the attention was worth the price. But attention wouldn't save her, because the mountain of evidence was too high, and her mask of innocence was too thin. Before we move forward, take a second to like this video and subscribe. These stories aren't just about crime. They're about people, choices, and the devastating consequences that follow. By subscribing, you make sure these stories, and the lessons they carry, continue to be heard. The trial pressed on, and Aria's carefully crafted facade began to crumble. Her defense argued she was manipulated by Nathan, that she was just a teenager caught under the influence of an older, more dominant boyfriend. But prosecutors reminded the jury of her texts, her laughter, her fingerprints on the knife. She wasn't a passive participant. She was an active one. And soon, the jury would be forced to decide, was this narcissistic teenager truly guilty of murder, or just another victim of manipulation herself? The courtroom was silent as the prosecutor stood before the jury, a stack of papers in his hand and a screen behind him glowing with messages pulled straight from Aria's phone. "These are her words," he said firmly, pointing to the screen. "This is not manipulation. This is not confusion. This is intent." Text after text appeared. Aria mocking Matthew. Aria egging Nathan on. Aria making light of the plan that would cost a young man his life. The jurors read each line, their expressions tightening. Some shook their heads. Others avoided eye contact with her entirely. Across the room, Matthew's mother clutched a tissue, her knuckles white. His father stared forward, stone-faced but trembling beneath the surface. They had sat through days of testimony, but hearing Aria's own words displayed so plainly was almost unbearable. It was like Matthew was being humiliated all over again, even in death. And yet, there Aria sat, her posture straight, her lips curved into a faint smile, as if the trial itself was nothing more than a stage performance. She leaned toward her attorney, whispered something, then glanced at the jurors as though she still believed she could charm them. But charm has limits, and this time, it was failing. The prosecution brought in witnesses, classmates who testified about Aria's manipulative streak, acquaintances who had seen her boast about getting what she wanted, and experts who explained how her behavior fit patterns of narcissism and a lack of empathy. Then came Nathan Ortiz, brought in shackled, his face pale and drained. Nathan sat before the court and told his version of the night. He admitted to stabbing Matthew, but insisted that Aria had played a pivotal role, that she had taunted him, encouraged him, and even laughed as it happened. His testimony painted her not as a bystander, but as a partner in crime. Aria's defense tried to dismantle his credibility, pointing out his criminal record, his desperation for a lighter sentence, his tendency to shift blame. But Nathan's words, when layered on top of the texts and the interrogation footage, aligned too closely with the story the evidence already told. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. The defense argued she was only 16, that her brain wasn't fully developed, that she fell under the spell of an older boyfriend. They painted her as vulnerable, manipulated, incapable of true intent. But the jury had seen her smirks, heard her laughter, and read her cruel messages. Vulnerable didn't look like this. The trial stretched on, each day adding to the weight of the evidence. And slowly, the cracks began to show in Aria's composure. At first, it was just her lips tightening when the texts were read aloud. Then it was her shifting uncomfortably as the recordings played. By the time Nathan's testimony ended, her once confident gaze had dulled. The realization was setting in. She couldn't laugh her way out of this. When the closing arguments ended, the jury was sent to deliberate. Hours passed. Aria sat waiting, arms crossed, tapping her fingers, still trying to project an air of control. But every so often, her mask slipped. Her eyes darted nervously toward the doors. Her foot shook under the table, and then the jury returned. The courtroom hushed as the foreman stood, paper in hand. Aria's attorney leaned forward, whispering last words of reassurance. Her parents, seated in the back, clutched one another's hands. Matthew's family held their breath. The verdict was read, guilty of first-degree murder. The words landed like a hammer. Matthew's mother gasped, tears streaming down her face. His father closed his eyes, a long exhale escaping his lips. The family embraced, grief and justice mingling in the same breath. Aria for the first time froze. Her smirk disappeared, her lips parted, her eyes wide, the weight of the moment crashing down. She looked to her attorney, waiting for him to say something, anything, that would undo what she'd just heard. But there was nothing left to say. The judge moved quickly to sentencing. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. The ultimate punishment for someone so young, but a punishment the court deemed fitting for the brutality of the crime. As the sentence was announced, Aria's facade shattered completely. She shook her head, her voice breaking as she muttered, "No, this isn't fair." She looked around the courtroom desperately, searching for a sympathetic face, someone who might still see her as a child, as a victim. But all she found were cold stares. This was the moment the world would remember her for. The narcissistic teen killer realizing, too late, that she would spend the rest of her life behind bars. The cameras caught every flicker of panic, every tearless sob, every plea that went unanswered. And when she was finally led away in handcuffs, the image of her face, once smug and untouchable, now pale and broken, became a chilling symbol of justice served. Matthew's family, though devastated by their loss, felt a measure of closure. They had endured the unbearable, but at least they knew the person who took their son's life would never walk free again. Aria's parents sat silently, torn between love for their daughter and the horror of what she had done. And the public, who had followed every twist and turn, walked away with a haunting reminder. Evil doesn't always come with age. Sometimes it hides behind the smile of a teenager, waiting for the moment to reveal itself. Before we continue with what happened to Aria behind prison walls, hit subscribe. Because these aren't just stories. They're lessons about how choices, no matter how young you are, can define your entire life. The clank of iron doors echoed as Aria Armstead was led into the correctional facility that would now be her home. Gone were the stylish clothes, the hair flips, the gum-chewing smirks. In their place was a standard-issue uniform, her hair tied back, her wrists cuffed. For the first time in her life, Aria was not in control. Prison is not a place that bends to personality. It does not care about charm or teenage defiance or the games of manipulation she once played. Inside those walls, Aria was stripped of her image. She was just another inmate, defined not by who she pretended to be, but by the crime that had put her there. The adjustment was brutal. Guards reported that in her first days, Aria still carried herself with a sense of entitlement, demanding small privileges, rolling her eyes at authority. But it didn't take long for reality to sink in. The routines, the harshness, the absence of freedom, all of it pressed down on her. And the other inmates? They weren't impressed by her story. They weren't charmed by her smirk. To them, she was nothing more than a teenage killer who had taken a life she had no right to take. Word of her crime spread quickly inside. Inmates whispered about the girl who lured a boy to his death and laughed about it. Some confronted her, testing her bravado. Others avoided her, unwilling to be near someone who wore her guilt so shamelessly in court. Slowly, the arrogance faded. The reality of life without parole began to carve its mark. Meanwhile, outside those walls, Matthew Collins' family tried to rebuild their shattered lives. The trial was over, justice delivered, but grief is not bound by verdicts. His mother often spoke of the silence in their home, of the empty chair at the dinner table. His father described the ache of passing Matthew's favorite places in town, knowing he would never walk through their doors again. They clung to memories, photos, laughter, stories retold. And though the verdict had given them closure, it had not given them peace. Because peace, they knew, would never come. For Aria's family, the aftermath was its own nightmare. They were forced to reconcile the child they raised with the monster the world now saw. They defended her at times, insisting she was manipulated, that she was still just a girl. But even they couldn't erase the evidence. The texts, the smirks, the laughter in that interrogation room. They visited her in prison, sitting across the glass, their conversations punctuated by the sound of distant doors locking. It was a cruel contrast to the life they once imagined for her. And the public, who had followed the case with fascination and horror, debated endlessly. Some argued Aria was proof that evil can bloom even in youth. Others said she was a cautionary tale of how toxic relationships and unchecked narcissism can spiral into tragedy. Her name became a fixture in true crime forums, her face a viral clip in countless YouTube analyses, her smirk a symbol of chilling indifference. But as months turned into years, that viral attention faded. New crimes, new trials, new faces stole the spotlight. And Aria Armstead remained where the judge had sent her, a lifer in a cell, growing older behind bars. What never faded, though, was Matthew Collins' memory. His family continued to honor him, speaking his name, sharing his story, reminding the world that behind every sensational headline lies a real person who deserved so much more. His kindness, his trust, his youth. all stolen because someone thought her own amusement was worth more than his life. Aria's story is one that still unsettles, not because she was the youngest or the most violent, but because she embodied a type of danger many overlook, the danger of someone who feels no empathy, who sees people as pawns, who believes consequences will never touch them. Her laughter in that interrogation room wasn't just unnerving. It was a glimpse into a mind that never truly valued another human being. And that is what makes this case unforgettable. It reminds us that evil doesn't always look like a monster hiding in the shadows. Sometimes it looks like a teenager with a smile, a phone in her hand, and a heart that never learned compassion. If you've stayed with this story until now, take a moment to subscribe. These documentaries aren't just entertainment. They are memorials for victims, warnings about choices, and lessons for all of us. By subscribing, you help keep Matthew's name alive, and you make sure his story continues to reach the world. In the end, justice was served. The narcissistic teen killer who once thought she could laugh her way past detectives now wakes up every day to bars, to chains, to the knowledge that she will never again walk free. But justice, as always, is only part of the story. Because no sentence, no matter how harsh, can bring back the life that was lost. Matthew Collins is gone. His future erased. His family forever broken. And Aria Armstead? She has all the time in the world to realize what forever truly means.